He tried to auction off my wedding ring. That's when I knew the little boy I raised was truly gone. I'm Alara Vance, and I'm 74 years young, though some days, like this one, I feel like I've lived 1,000. I'm sitting here telling you this story because every woman, every mother, needs to know that the greatest strength you possess is the one you think you've lost. The courtroom air was thick, heavy, and tasted faintly of dust and forgotten promises. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but pregnant with unspoken accusations. I clutched my handbag, a sensible, worn leather thing Arthur had given me for our 20th anniversary, and my knuckles were bone white. It felt less like a purse and more like a shield against the man sitting across the aisle. Julian, my son. My only child. He was looking at me with an expression I can only describe as surgical. Calculating, precise, and entirely without feeling. Gone was the warmth, the casual dismissal, the grudging affection. All that remained was raw, undisguised hunger for what he believed was his birthright. The ironwood foundry, Arthur's life work. My home in many ways, because we built it together, brick with salvaged brick. Julian's lawyer, a creature named Sterling, leaned back in his leather chair like a vulture surveying a carcass. Everything about Sterling screamed, rented for the occasion. The suit was too sharp, the cologne too loud, the smile too thin. He was whispering something to Julian, and I saw my son nod, the slight movement making the silver cufflinks flash. He was playing the part of the aggrieved heir perfectly. I looked away, settling my gaze on the judge, a formidable woman with the unfortunate name of Judge Hawthorne. Her glasses were perched on her nose like tiny silver question marks, and her gaze missed nothing. She represented the cold, impersonal logic that was attempting to dismantle the warm, messy history of my life. The proceedings began, a dull, droning recitation of legal terms that felt utterly obscene when applied to a lifetime of love and sacrifice. Sterling rose, smoothing his already immaculate hair, and began his performance. He spoke of my late husband, Arthur, with a reverence that would have made Arthur himself choke on his coffee, and then, slowly, meticulously, he began to strip away my dignity. He painted me as a charming but utterly naive elderly woman, wholly unfit to manage the complex affairs of the ironwood foundry. Mrs. Vance, Sterling purred, his voice dripping with false sympathy, is regrettably a simple homemaker, a woman whose experience lies in managing a kitchen, not a multi-million-dollar industrial asset. Her decisions have been, shall we say, sentimental. He used words like irresponsible, wasteful, and the one that truly stung, a risk to the legacy. Risk to the legacy? I wanted to stand up right then and there and tell him how Alara Vance had spent 50 years being Arthur's silent partner, his bookkeeper, his late-night coffee maker, and the only person who understood the mess of his handwritten ledgers. I ran the house so he could run the foundry, and that, I assure you, was the harder job. But I remained silent. A lesson Arthur had taught me. When your enemies are talking, Alara, they're giving you ammunition. Then came Julian's turn. He stood, and I saw the tremor in his hand, a tiny betraying sign of his nerves, or perhaps, just perhaps, a sliver of shame. But his voice, when it came, was loud and clear, ringing with manufactured outrage. My father's will, which leaves everything solely to my mother, is fundamentally flawed, Julian declared, addressing the judge but leveling his coldest stare at me. It fails to protect the very asset it was meant to preserve. She has no concept of how to run a modern business. I, however, have the expertise, the vision, and the lineage to take the foundry into the future. My mother is merely holding on to what she doesn't deserve. Doesn't deserve. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. It was the summation of every dismissive look, every condescending tone, every casual disregard he'd shown me since he hit adolescence. He saw me as a placeholder, a temporary obstacle, a little old lady who should be knitting quietly in the corner, not standing between him and his inheritance. I watched Judge Hawthorne's face. She was listening, taking notes, her expression utterly inscrutable. She wasn't swayed by Julian's drama, but she wasn't dismissing his argument either. He had a point. I wasn't an MBA. My degree was in English literature. Julian's lawyer concluded, resting his case on the perceived incompetence of a 74-year-old widow. The silence returned, now pulsing, electric. I took a slow breath, counted to 10, and prepared myself for the next question. The truth is, Arthur and I didn't just build a life. We engineered one, like the very machinery that ran in the ironwood foundry. It was a metal fabrication plant Arthur inherited as a crumbling shed from his own father, and together we transformed it. Our love story wasn't cinematic. It was practical. It was early mornings and stained hands. It was budgeting for the new lathe by wearing the same coat for 3 winters. Arthur was all blueprints and grit. I was the grease that kept the gears turning. I remember the day Arthur decided he needed to put his affairs in perfect order. It was 2 years before the diagnosis, but Arthur always lived in anticipation of the next problem. We were sitting in the dining room, surrounded by the scent of lemon polish and the soft glow of a lamp. "Elara," he said, pushing a thick document across the table. "Everything goes to you, unconditional. You are the sole executor, the sole beneficiary." I frowned, tracing the embossed seal with my finger. "But Julian? He's our son, Arthur. Even if he's—" "Difficult," Arthur sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Julian is a hurricane, my dear. A very charming, expensive hurricane. He takes, he does not build. If I give him the foundry, he will strip it, sell it for parts, and be broke again within 5 years. He doesn't see metal and potential. He sees liquidity. It was a hard truth, but I knew it was fair. Julian had always chafed against the steady, disciplined work of the foundry. He'd gone off to business school talking about disruptive innovation and leveraged buyouts. His real failing, though, happened 5 years ago. He came to Arthur with a grand plan for a high-tech robotic venture. It was all slick slides and dizzying projections. Arthur, against my advice, lent Julian a considerable sum, not from the foundry's capital, but from his personal savings, the money meant for our retirement. Within 18 months, the venture collapsed, leaving a trail of furious creditors and a 6-figure debt. Arthur paid it all off, silently. He absorbed the loss like a wound, refusing to let it touch the foundry. Julian, meanwhile, blamed the market, the timing, the lack of his father's full belief. Never himself. "I tried to protect him from the world," Arthur whispered that night, his voice heavy with paternal guilt. "Now I must protect the world from him, and protect you from him." That night, Arthur didn't just write a simple will. He created a contingency. He told me he'd been keeping a separate, detailed journal of all his private financial actions, the payments he made for Julian, the hidden accounts, the precise reasoning for his distrust. He said he'd coded the entries and created a failsafe, a way to speak his truth from beyond the grave, should Julian ever press the issue. "If he challenges you, Elara, you find the ledger of intent," Arthur had instructed, his eyes dark with seriousness. "It's hidden behind the 3rd drawer in my study. It's written in the language of the old foundry, the codes only we know. It will lead you to the rest." I thought of that ledger now. It was a heavy leather-bound book, smelling of pipe tobacco and machine oil. I'd located it the week after Julian filed his petition, dusting it off and feeling the weight of Arthur's trust. I'd spent countless hours deciphering the mix of old shop slang, private ciphers, and Greek letter substitutions that made up his personal bookkeeping language. It was a task that had calmed me, forcing me back into the rhythm of Arthur's brilliant, complicated mind. And the final entry led to what I now carried in my sensible leather handbag, a thick, laminated keycard, completely blank on its surface. The courtroom was quiet again. Sterling sat down, his mission seemingly accomplished. Julian looked smug. It was my turn. Judge Hawthorne looked at me, her expression softening just a fraction, perhaps seeing a reflection of her own inevitable future. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice clear, "do you have anything to offer in defense of your capacity to maintain this estate and legacy?" I rose slowly, 74 years old, but my spine felt like the ironwood beams of the foundry. I adjusted the lapel of my navy blue blazer. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and steady, devoid of the trembling that had plagued me all morning. "My capacity is not measured by a business degree, but by a lifetime of commitment. My husband Arthur understood this. And because he understood that greed can sometimes wear the face of his own son, he prepared a comprehensive defense of his wishes. Julian's smirk vanished. Sterling's head snapped up. Mr. Sterling described me as a simple homemaker, I continued, meeting the lawyer's eyes directly. And he is correct. But a home is built on a foundation, and I was and remain the keystone of the ironwood foundry. I reached into my handbag and withdrew the keycard. It looked like nothing, just a piece of glossy white plastic. I placed it on the table in front of me. My husband did not trust a simple document to convey his true intent. Knowing the lengths to which some might go to contest it, I stated, picking up the card again and holding it up for the judge to see. This is the access key to a secure digital safe deposit box. The contents of that box, which include video evidence and a final codicil to the will, were explicitly conditional on one event: the challenging of the primary beneficiary. A collective gasp went around the room. Sterling shot to his feet, shouting an objection. "Objection, Your Honor! This is inadmissible! Unverified evidence! Hearsay from beyond the grave." Judge Hawthorne raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Her eyes were fixed on the keycard. The procedural formality was battling with pure human curiosity on her face. "On what grounds does the late Mr. Vance's provision rest, Mrs. Vance?" the judge asked, her voice low. "It rests, Your Honor, on his final codicil, which details the full extent of my son Julian's past financial misdemeanors against the family, the exact amounts Arthur secretly paid to clear them, and his deeply held conviction that Julian must never be given control of Ironwood. The video will confirm his specific intent." Julian, who had been sitting statue still, suddenly surged forward, knocking his chair slightly. "That's a lie! She's fabricating this. There are no misdemeanors." "Mr. Vance," the judge warned, her gavel tapping sharply once. "Be seated." "It is not a lie, Julian," I said, looking at him, my voice devoid of anger, only sorrow. "It is the truth your father had to hide to protect his own legacy and your reputation. Now I'm about to show my hand, the one Arthur always taught me to keep close. But before that, darling, hush. Settle in for the good part. If this story has snagged your attention, maybe you ought to ring that little bell or whatever it is you do these days to follow along. And while you're thinking, tap a comment below. Tell me where you are in the world. It's a comfort to this old woman to know where the ripples of my story go, even if it's just a whisper across the ocean. Now, where were we? Ah, yes, the silence. The tension in the courtroom was a physical weight, pressing on my chest. Sterling was now frantically whispering with Julian, their heads bowed low, their earlier confidence utterly shattered. Judge Hawthorne, a woman clearly accustomed to the mundane dramas of family law, was now dealing with a mystery box. She directed the bailiff to take the keycard, instructing him to use the court's secure internet connection and projector to access the digital box in chambers. "We will take a 10-minute recess," Judge Hawthorne announced, standing. "Mrs. Vance, I advise you to remain ready. Mr. Sterling, I suggest you compose yourself." The 10 minutes stretched into 20. The court slowly filled back up, but the atmosphere was fundamentally altered. Julian wouldn't meet my eyes. Sterling had gone from a picture of aggression to a study in professional anxiety, dabbing his brow with a silk handkerchief. When Judge Hawthorne returned, she didn't sit down immediately. She stood behind her bench, holding the laminated keycard. Her pale face now carried a distinct flush, and her lips were a thin, rigid line. The inscrutability was gone, replaced by a profound, professional discomfort. "Let the record reflect," Judge Hawthorne began, her voice slower and heavier than before, "that the digital safe deposit box has been accessed. The contents confirm the existence of a final, authenticated codicil prepared by the deceased, Arthur Vance. This codicil is indeed conditional on a challenge to the primary beneficiary, Elara Vance." She paused, taking a slow, deep breath. The projector screen on the wall behind her bench flickered to life. "As this codicil references past conduct of the challenger, Julian Vance," the judge continued, her voice gaining steel, "and contains a specific, final declaration of intent, the court finds the video evidence admissible." "Bailiff, please proceed," the video began. It was Arthur, not the frail man I last saw, but the Arthur from about a year ago, robust and focused, sitting in his favorite armchair in the study, a worn copy of the Foundry's original charter resting on his knee. He looked directly into the camera, a small lens I now realized was cleverly hidden in the eye of the ceramic owl I always hated, and his expression was one of profound weariness. "If you are watching this, Alara," he started, his voice a gravelly, familiar comfort, "it means he has forced your hand. I am so sorry he did." He then turned his gaze, or the camera's gaze, toward Julian. "Son, if you are also watching this, pay attention, because this is my final word on the matter of the Ironwood Foundry. You spoke of vision. You spoke of lineage. I speak of trust and responsibility." Arthur held up the worn leather ledger, the same ledger of intent I'd spent weeks decoding. "On pages 37 through 41 of this book," Arthur explained, his finger pointing precisely, "is the record of your Vance Robotics venture. The one you swore was the future. The one that, in reality, was a shell game designed to fraudulently leverage the Ironwood name and assets without my consent. You used the Foundry's dormant collateral to secure loans, Julian. Loans that, when your vision failed, would have sunk us all. I had to sell 3 patents and our vacation cottage, our home, Julian, to cover the shortfall and keep the Ironwood name clear of scandal." The words were calm, measured, and utterly devastating. Julian's face, which had been pale, now looked ashen, his mouth open in silent denial. "I protected you then, Julian," Arthur said, his voice dropping, the true weight of the legacy in his tone. "I saved your reputation and my family's business, but I cannot allow you to inherit the means to destroy what took 4 generations to build. A legacy is not a birthright. It is a burden of stewardship, and you have proven you are not a steward." Arthur then looked back at the lens, his eyes filling with deep, abiding love, but not for Julian. Alara is the only one who understands the Foundry's true value. She is the one who valued the old machines over the quick profit. She is the one who never once asked me to sell or to retire because she knew that the work was our lifeblood. She is the keeper of the flame. I leave everything unconditionally to my wife, Alara Vance. She will manage the Foundry, and she will decide your future. I trust her completely." The screen went black. The silence that followed was 1,000 times heavier than before. Sterling was frozen, his mouth agape, his entire professional life crumbling under the weight of an ex machina plot twist. Julian was shuddering, finally broken, not by the loss of the money, but by the public, permanent, and recorded disapproval of his father. Judge Hawthorne picked up her gavel. She looked down at the court with an air of finality. "The late Mr. Arthur Vance's intent is no longer ambiguous," she declared. "It is, in fact, devastatingly clear. The court finds in favor of the defendant, Mrs. Alara Vance. The will stands, and she retains full and exclusive control of the estate, including the Ironwood Foundry. This court is adjourned." The sound of the gavel striking the block was the loudest, most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I didn't feel triumph. Not immediately. The immediate sensation was one of pure, dizzying relief. Like a 1,000-pound weight had been lifted from my chest, only to be replaced by the quiet, familiar ache of a mother's heartbreak. Julian stumbled out of the courtroom, not a word, not a glance. He left Sterling scrambling to gather his scattered dignity and his expensive briefcases. I watched him go, and for a moment I saw the ghost of the little boy who used to run to me with arms wide open, clutching a scraped knee. I whispered a silent goodbye to that ghost. As I gathered my things, the sensible handbag, the comforting weight of the ledger of intent, I felt a different kind of strength surging through me. It wasn't the fiery, aggressive strength Julian possessed. It was the enduring, steady strength of Ironwood itself. I'd stood for myself. I'd honored Arthur. I had saved the Foundry. When I finally got home, the late afternoon sun was streaming into the dining room, illuminating the exact spot where Arthur and I had discussed his will. The house smelled like the lilacs I'd cut that morning. It felt open. The shadows of fear and anxiety that had haunted the corners since Arthur's death seemed to have scattered like dust motes. I put the ledger of intent on Arthur's desk, placing the keycard on top of it. I kicked off my sensible court shoes, poured myself a generous measure of the single malt scotch Arthur kept for emergencies, and went straight to the kitchen. I put on my favorite old record, Ella Fitzgerald, singing Cheek to Cheek, and then right there in the middle of the worn linoleum, I danced. I didn't dance like a young woman. My knees reminded me that I am 74. I danced with the unvarnished, quiet joy of a survivor. I twirled around the kitchen island, laughing at the sheer absurdity of it all. For a few precious minutes, I wasn't the widow, the defendant, or the mother of a broken man. I was just Alara, free, whole, and the undeniable keystone of her own life. In the days that followed, the Foundry's head manager, Mr. Jenkins, came over. I showed him the ledger, the codicil, and the judge's ruling. He just smiled, a tear welling in his eye. "We always knew you were the real boss, Mrs. Vance," he said. And I believed him. I thought about forgiveness. How it's not just something you offer to others, but something you must grant yourself. I forgave myself for raising a boy who valued gold over grace. I forgave Arthur for laying such a heavy burden on my shoulders. And I forgave the world for underestimating an old woman with a sensible handbag. Standing up for the Ironwood Foundry hadn't just been about the money. It was about reclaiming my own worth, my voice, and my story. It was about realizing that I was the one who was always capable, always in control, even when I felt the most vulnerable. So I sit here now with a glass of wine, the music playing softly, looking out at the world. I want to ask you, my dear, have you ever faced a moment when you had to stand up for your legacy, not with a roar, but with a quiet, resolute truth? Have you ever had to choose between what was easy and what was right? We all have at least one wild story. And trust me, your best chapters are still ahead. Here's to us, ladies. May we always find the courage to dance in our kitchens, no matter what life throws our way.